Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you back to our second Meet the IFRS17 Expert Live event. I'm joined today again by Mark Miller, Legerity's Global IFRS17 lead, to answer your question here live. Hi, Mark. How are you doing today?
Hi, Nicholas. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody.
All good?
Yes. Very good. Yes, looking forward to this.
Perfect. So the aim of today's event is really to help you and your firm on your journey toward IFRS 17 compliance. We will start with the question we received after the first event, and then we get through your live questions. As a reminder to everyone, you can ask all your questions in the comment section below, or you can drop us an email at info@legerityfinancials.com. We'll do our very best to answer all your questions during the event, but if by any chance we can't, then we will make sure to come back to you via email after the event. So let's start with this first question. Mark, so this is a question about cash flow. Where should the discounting of cash flow happen? What are the benefits of doing discounting in the actuarial solution or in the subledger?
Okay, thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a fairly important part of IFRS 17, and definitely, you know, as in Fast Post, we have the capability in the subledger, so that's an option. I think it comes down to individual insurers. So both options are valid solutions, and in the architectures that we're looking at, we see some clients wanting to do it in the subledger and one to do it in the model. So I think some of the major considerations are the maturity of your modeling capability. So clearly, if you don't have that available, then it maybe makes sense to ask your subledger accounting rules engine to do that for you. But what you do, of course, have to take into account is the data involved, and obviously cash flow strings, particularly for life products, can be quite voluminous, and especially if you're going to be doing a lot of dimensions in your data. So if you have a lot of groups, or you want to track a lot of modeling steps or a lot of cash flow steps, then the volume of data being transferred between the two applications can be quite large, and so you need to sort of think about that in terms of the speed of operations. So is there a real benefit? Well, I suppose actuarial solutions are, you know, that's kind of what they do. They're very good at that. So if you have a mature working solution, then, you know, maybe it makes sense to use that because you know, those kind of applications are doing what they're designed to do, and then the minimal data transfer over to the subledger. But having said that, if your actuarial capabilities aren't so mature, then it's perfectly valid to send in your cash flows or even your loss data and some cash flow patterns to an accounting rules subledger platform, which can handle that functionality for you. So, you know, I think on balance, we see both options. I think probably the actuarial solution is a more natural place for that, but it's perfectly valid to do that in the rules engine and subledger.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much, Mark. So the second question is more around the CSM calculation. Should I do the CSM calculation inside or outside the subledger? That's a very common question, actually.
Yeah. Well, it is. Again, we work with clients who do both. And you know, in this case, I would actually say that the more natural place for the CSM is inside the subledger. So if we think about IFRS 17, it's an accounting standard. It's all about transactions and balances. So for sure, it's driven from actuarial calculations. And I suppose, you know, when people first looked at the standard, you can imagine you measure your fulfillment cash flows, and then, of course, the other side is the CSM. So you immediately think, okay, the actuarial solution would be a good place to do the CSM. But then, you know, the CSM has a long journey over the life of the product. So, you know, recruiting interest, releasing for coverage, and then handling all the experience adjustments. And of course, groups can become onerous, or onerous groups can become profitable again. So there's a lot of more sort of transactional style movements in the CSM. And when you have many CSM, so many balances and the long history of these balances, that's ideally placed for something like a subledger, which holds balances and movements and transactions in that kind of detail. So I would absolutely say you can do the CSM in the actuarial solution, and we do see people do that, but I would observe they tend to have to build a little bit of extra functionality on the front of the model because it's not really a modeling job. So there's a bit of an investment there. And then another interesting observation is, of course, it's not IFRS 17 is much more than the CSM. So there's all sorts of other transactions and things that you have to look at. And so you've got to think about all the accounting that you need to go with your IFRS 17 solution. And for that, it's not necessarily straightforward. So the advantage of, say, a pre-configured accounting rules engine subledger is you have that framework already in place. So you may choose not to use that and just use the boxes you like for the postings, but there is a big benefit in the interpretation of IFRS 17 and how that relates to transactions and balances and movements. So you can take advantage of those configurations inside that are already inside the subledger to help guide you and form what kind of data and transactions you need.
Great. But just to reassure some of the people who already did this investment, it's possible to do the CSM calculation outside of the subledger for those people.
Yeah, absolutely. And and there are use cases that we're working with where that's absolutely the case, and it's a perfectly valid solution. So there's no problem doing that. I would just stick to my view. As a finance guy, I think once you get to the end of the process and you see how it works, you kind of think, maybe a subledger would have been a more natural place. So that's the kind of the feeling that I have. It's a more natural place to have it in the subledger. The disclosures are then supported easily with the balances, and you have all the data lineage in one place. But absolutely, it works perfectly well to do it in the actuarial solution. So if you have already invested in that concept, then I think you still need a subledger to hold all the balances and movements, and that really helps with the audit and the way that you reconcile and analyze the financials. But yeah, at this late stage, if you have made that investment, then perhaps it's a good idea to stick with that and leverage the subledger just for holding the accounting.
Great, thank you. I'm sure a lot of people must be happy hearing that. So the next question is really when we think a little bit beyond IFRS 17, and that's a question that we had from the past webinar where people were asking, how should we factor IFRS 9, local GAAP, and other financial changes when setting the IFRS 17 strategy?
Yeah, I mean, certainly when the standard first came out, a lot of insurers were looking to take advantage of the change to invest in the back office. Often, particularly I think in the insurance industry, the back office gets a raw deal, and with a lot of regulatory changes in the recent past, a lot of money's been sucked into that, and there has been a bit of an underinvestment, I think, in many insurers' accounting architectures and the supporting sort of data environment. So that time has passed a bit because time is running short and we're getting near the deadline. So I think probably at this stage you need to have a strong eye on compliance, and that has to be the definite focus. But there's that. The clever insurers are focused on compliance, but they're buying capabilities that give them a roadmap to do other things. So I think that's the best way to look at it. And I think that means you need to point yourself towards what sort of generic platform rather than a point IFRS 17 solution. So perhaps one of the mistakes that people made with Solvency II is they designed a very bespoke, narrow, get across the line kind of solution that then isn't very flexible and dynamic and doesn't do anything else. So if you have a more generic accounting rules engine, subledger type platform, then of course you can use that for other things. The IFRS 17 becomes just a configuration, and then you can extend your architecture to cover other subject areas. So we're definitely seeing that insurers are working out that the allocation capability of a rules engine is very powerful, and you can extend your project very easily to look into automating processes around allocations, particularly where in the past those spreadsheets have been used a lot. And IFRS 17 and IFRS 9 go live at the same time. So often separate teams have been working on the two projects, and the IFRS 9 may already be handled. For insurance companies, IFRS 9 isn't as complicated as IFRS 17. So many insurers are sort of managing that as a separate thing. But of course, it would make sense to bring it all together. So again, if you have a kind of solution that is more than just IFRS 17, then you can migrate things like IFRS 9 into the source, so you have your numbers in one place, and that really helps create consolidated views. And then many insurers report under more than one regime. So US GAAP or IFRS, continue to look at IFRS 4 or other local gaps around the world. So we're definitely seeing a lot of insurers, once they're confident on the IFRS 17 side, asking us about migrating balances and processing data under additional gaps. And I think that, for me, is a really important decision that you make as an insurer when you invest in your solution. You've got to think to yourself, am I investing in a point solution which gets me IFRS 17, or am I investing in a capability that then allows me to build on that and get more out of it over time? And for sure, the latter is obviously, I would say, better, and that's about looking carefully about what kind of capabilities you want in the longer term.
Okay, brilliant. And if you go a little bit more into the details of those, what are the functionalities that you really should have in your solution to comply with those other regulations in the future?
Yeah, and I think that's where what we're talking about is accounting rules here, and accounting standards, and balances and transactions and all those sorts of features. So you're looking for a financial system. You're not looking for a sort of data-driven IFRS 17 solution. So you can have things that bring data together and calculate the CSM, your future cash flows, and give you journals to post into your general ledger. But what you want to see is all capabilities about how can I design accounting rules, how can I link that to sort of calculations where the rules are quite complex, how can I manage granular balances, and then how can I drill down into those balances and help explain and maybe reconcile between IFRS 17 and other views. So that's kind of what you want. You want a solution that goes, is not just IFRS 17. So some solutions just do IFRS 17. That's all they do. What you need is something that can perform. You can design your own accounting rules and be flexible, and things like the allocation engine is definitely an example of a sort of bolt onto the accounting rule space, which has a lot of use cases and is very powerful. So that would certainly be something I would want to see in a platform that gives you more scope for expanding in the future.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. So those first questions are very much around the technology functionalities. Here it's a little bit more around the PA model and more the transformation. When considering the PA model, do we need to replace our current IFRS 4 premium earning calculation engine?
That's an interesting question. So again, when time is tight, you probably want to look at minimizing as many changes. So if you have a really good premium earnings calculation engine, then certainly I would suggest looking at that to help drive your IFRS 17 accounting. I think what we see is the calculation in itself, take the premium and earn it over the life of the policy. That's not particularly complex calculation, but what we do see is in the melee of the real life world, where contracts are being amended, adjusted, cancelled, and being all written at different times, and maybe contracts have different periods. So sometimes in this earning sort of calculation, there can be quite a lot of complexity. And so there's quite a bit to understand there. So if you have already invested in that sort of capability, then in the short term, I think it makes sense to try and use that. Of course, you're going to have some challenges. The IFRS 17 groups maybe are not the same as the way that you manage data now, so it could require some modifications. But as a first point, I would definitely suggest having a look at that to minimize the investment at this stage. But having said that, if you do need, if you feel that's a bit deficient, or if you haven't really got anything, then I think the accounting rules engine subledger is ideally placed for these calculations, and perhaps as a transformational goal, that is potentially the right place to be doing these calculations, because I think some of these engines are a little bit like a black box kind of thing, or maybe they're owned by one people, and maybe they're supported by IT. So there are issues with them. And I think the accounting rules engine and subledger can be a great place to build a sort of future-proof calculation process, very transparent and very linked to all the financials, and to give you that sort of ability to drive more detail into the process to help support MI requirements and things like that in the future. So in summary, perhaps at this stage leverage what you've got, because it is maybe a complex area, but definitely the long-term goal, I would think, would be to do something like this in the accounting rules and subledger platform, assuming you're investing in that, which I think would be a good idea.
And if I can ask, does the same consideration also apply for amortizing acquisition costs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is probably an area where you're less likely to have invested in an engine in the past, or maybe it's likely to be less sophisticated, the way commissions and cash flows around the sales channel work, that can be a bit more messy. So if you have something already, then maybe take advantage of that. But I think with the complexity of IFRS 17 and the way that the groupings, the allocation of acquisition costs between current and future renewed contracts, things like that, they can introduce a bit more complexity than, say, in the premium earnings. So I think it's less likely that you'll be reusing assets that you already have. And the accounting rules subledger place would be a good point to do that. But by the same token, in the real world, there is quite a lot going on with commissions, clawbacks, and all these sort of things. So if you have processes in place, don't just rip them up and throw them away at this stage. To get compliant, you should probably take advantage of what you have. And that's where a really strong accounting framework comes into play, because then you can sort of map onto how your existing process works and where you might need additional support with new calculations.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So one more question from Andre in South Africa, who I can see is attending live. How should insurers handle multi-currency inside the same group?
Right, okay, we're going to finish on a tough one then. Yeah, so definitely what we see in our projects is FX adds quite a lot of extra complexity, and perhaps it's something that gets looked at a bit later in the process, but it's a real world feature that we live in a multi-currency world, so we definitely have to handle that. So multi-currency is not new, you'll be accounting for it already, so all the sort of features that you need for translation of transactions and revaluing of balances, you need to have that absolutely in your solution. And that's where I suppose it's advantageous to work with products and vendors that do that naturally anyway, that where sort of revaluation and FX is just part of the product out of the box. But with IFRS 17 there are some specific considerations. So I think it's clear that the CSM, the insurance contract, is a mandatory item, so we need to take into account FX changes. We're looking at future events, so that's something just to be clear about. The FX that you're using isn't necessarily transactional. It's not happened. We're quite often, when we're thinking about future cash flows, we're dealing with future FX rates, and that sort of makes it an assumption. So we see, I suppose, initially a lot of people thought that FX changes in assumptions would go through the CSM, but increasingly I think we see people consider that FX is a financial assumption, and should therefore be locked at the beginning of the group, crystallized in the CSM, and then maybe you should track changes in those through the profit and loss account. So that's where I think we are mostly at the moment with our clients is that point of view, with the CSM being a financial assumption, with the FX being a financial assumption that you make. So at a granular level, you therefore need to be very careful about tracking and reporting and accounting all those FX movements. And you can, in fact, disaggregate those effects to OCI as an option as well. And I suppose the last complication, having a look at the time there, this is a big subject, that I would just mention is, of course, CSMs maybe aren't in the currency that you report in. So I think the standard says that you should manage your CSM in the currencies that reflect the underlying cash flows, and that may not be the currency that you report in. So there's some additional complication there in that you need to be revaluing your CSM into your reporting currency and obviously booking those movements through that CSM. But that then means you've got balances in different currencies to manage, and when you've got a lot of CSM, potentially a lot of different currencies, that's quite a lot to keep a handle on. So having strong structures in the subledger is very useful for that.
Wonderful. So we have one last question. It's how should insurer perform transition calculations? So actually, we had an entire webinar on that subject, which you can find on our website. So maybe in the interest of time, I would direct you to our website to look for this webinar and many other webinars. And that would bring us to the end of today's Meet the IFRS 17 expert session. Mark, I just want to tell you big thank you for all the insight. It was really useful.
No, good questions.
Yes, definitely a lot of good questions. I really appreciate. So now just to finish, I just want to give you a quick word about Legerity. As many of you know, at Legerity, we developed an IFRS 17 solution and an accounting hub solution that's based on 3 principles: enterprise-grade functionalities, out-of-the-box configuration, and fast-track implementation. We really believe that tackling IFRS 17 in the right way will help you streamline and de-risk your project, but also deliver transformational benefits that will go far beyond IFRS 17. If you're interested in hearing more about Legerity, I definitely invite you to contact us via email at info@legerityfinancials.com, or you can go on our website and arrange a call with our IFRS 17 experts. Just click on Meet the Experts or book a meeting. I would invite you to follow us on LinkedIn to receive notifications for future events, webinars, and other IFRS 17 related material. The very last point, we have a webinar planned on the 16th of March. It's around the challenges of reinsurance, and you can find the registration link for that website, event on our website, or you can contact us to send you directly the invitation. I want to thank everybody and wish everyone a very good rest of the week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
IFRS 17 is complicated and brings a big change in global accounting standards. As an insurer, you will have lots of vendors trying to get your attention. Our approach at Legerity is different. It's based on decades of experience in accounting rule software and delivering IFRS 17 projects for some of the world's leading firms. FastPost Express does exactly what it says. It's everything you need to be IFRS 17 compliant, quickly, with no fuss, and will set you up for the future, whatever that might bring. Other solutions can be heavy, complicated, and often designed for other purposes, even other industries. All the stuff that just weighs you down. Some are positioned as light, but are full of empty promises. In fact, you actually end up spending more time, money, and effort than you were led to believe. And if you're tempted to solve in-house, you will find out the hard way that IFRS 17 isn't a problem you can tackle with spreadsheets. So why compromise? With Legerity's FastPost Express, you get an enterprise-grade IFRS 17 solution, pre-configured and SaaS delivered from a team with a track record of success. You benefit from a reduced implementation time, complexity, and expense. giving you regulatory peace of mind and a clear path beyond compliance. Insurance is about managing risk. Choosing your IFRS 17 solution shouldn't be one of them. Legerity. It's our business to take care of yours.